In this video, we continue our exploration of the clade bilateria. Most invertebrates, most animals, actually for that purpose, are going to be classified in the clade bilateria because they have bilateral symmetry. And now I want to talk to you about the Ecdysozoa. This Ecdysozoa includes several clades, subdivisions of this larger group known as the Ecdysozoa. And there are going to be two in particular we're going to explore in greater detail in this course. And one of those is going to be the nematodes, members of phylum Nematoda, and also the arthropods, animals that have an exoskeleton and jointed appendages. But let's begin with the Ecdysozoa. So these are going to be known as the roundworms. Notice that the body of these worms is going to be like a thread. It's like a very thin thread. Most nematodes are going to be microscopic. It is actually considered to be the largest number of animals on Earth. You can go to places where a cubic centimeter of soil can contain thousands of these worms. So in terms of numbers, nothing comes close to the nematodes, to the roundworms. And some of them are going to be parasites of just about every organism you can imagine, even plants and humans, of course. Another interesting detail about nematodes is that they are going to be found in some of the pets that you can have at home. You may be familiar with things like pinworms, heartworms, and a number of other parasites you can find. It's actually the most common parasite in the United States. Pinworms in particular can infect as many as 18% of the US population on any given year. And it is usually picked up by little kids at school, kids of elementary school age, and then they bring it home and share this parasite with the rest of the family. Here in this illustration, you can see a type of worm. This is called Ascaris. This is going to be one of the exceptions to the norm in that it can grow to be several inches in length. This is going to be a parasite of mammals, and also there are species of Ascaris that can be found in humans. Here you see another type of worm that can go and affect the hearts of animals, and they can be found in other organs in the body where cavities are going to be found. This actually can be also in the intestines of animals. What we know about these nematode worms is that in addition to the round body, they are going to be not segmented, and that is what places them into this group. The body is going to have a pseudocoelomate architecture. When you look at a cross-section, like this would be the cross-section we can obtain from a nematode from here, make a very thin slice, put it under a microscope, you're going to find that typical design of animals that have a complete digestive system. You're going to be finding that there's going to be like a tube. This is going to be the gut of the animal or intestine inside of a larger tube. And so you maybe have found this explanation in the textbook and also in the Master in Biology assignment, a tube within a tube. So here we go, the digestive tract inside of another cylinder, another tube. Another thing you're going to notice is that they have this pseudocoelomate body, meaning that this cavity, this space where organs are developing, and by the way, these are all internal organs of the nematode worm, they are going to be housed in a cavity, in a space that is lined in part by this endoderm. The endoderm forms the lumen of the intestine of these worms, and this layer, which is going to be a muscle layer, muscles have a mesoderm origin. The mesoderm is just underneath the ectoderm, which developed into the skin. So there goes the ectoderm, here's the mesoderm, here's the endoderm. And so right there, the space between mesoderm and endoderm, that is going to be known as a pseudocoelom. Another detail that you may find, I don't know, gross or interesting about these nematode worms is because of their parasitic lifestyle. They are going to focus a lot of the energy and resources into mating, into breeding. And so here you're looking at a male worm, and all of these round objects you see here are testes. They are going to be for the production of sperm cells, as you can imagine. For these nematode worms, sexes are usually separate. There's male worms, there's female worms. The female worms will only be in charge of making ovaries. And you can usually tell a female because the ovaries will be larger and not as numerous as all of these testes you see here in this cross section. So they have a complete digestive system, small body, and hydrostatic skeleton. If you want to review what are the components of this hydrostatic skeleton, is a tough cuticle, also muscles, and you can see here the bands of muscle cells that are going to help constrict the animal at times, and that creates a water pressure that can strengthen the body in parts or allow for locomotion at other times. What I want to tell you also about these animals is that in addition to many of them have been parasites, they're also going to be providing beneficial roles in the ecosystem because they're going to be doing a lot of the decomposition. Some of these are going to be free-living nematodes. So that's the phylum Nematoda. And another thing that I should mention about nematodes before I move on is that the reason they are placed into this clade Ecdysozoa is because they practice something you might remember already, which is called ecdysis. And this ecdysis, we've described it before as shedding the old skin. The old skin, we're going to call it a cuticle, and making a new one. Okay, so that's ecdysis. And so what people normally call the process of molting or shedding the exoskeleton. But I don't want to call this an exoskeleton because it isn't. It is a form of a hydrostatic skeleton, and the cuticle is tough. And so for the animal to continue growing, they have to get rid of that old cuticle, that old skin, and then secrete a new one so they can continue the process of growing. What we have here also in this clade Ecdysozoa is going to be the arthropods. And arthropods are well known because of their tough exoskeleton. One thing that I want you to know now about the exoskeleton of all arthropods is that the main function for this outer covering is actually serve as a place for attachment of muscles. And so these animals are going to sometimes achieve larger sizes. Some of them can be massive. I mean, think about something like a lobster. There are some spiders that can reach gigantic sizes too. I have had at times students who've been in the military, and they've had tours of duty in the Middle East where they have these camel spiders or camel tarantulas, and they're huge. And so for all that locomotion, for moving a big body, muscles have to attach to something. And what they must attach to is going to be the exoskeleton. I mean, think about your internal muscles, the muscles that allow you to move your arms and legs. They're all anchored to bones. Well, these animals are invertebrates, so they don't have bones. But what they do have is an exoskeleton. In addition to it, to the attachment for the muscles, the exoskeleton does serve another important function, and that is going to be providing protection and support to the animal. So the word arthropoda is going to be meaning arthro, which means joints. Like you and I have joints where our arm, for example, attaches to our shoulder. We have joints where our fingers are attaching to our hands, and so our joints at the wrist. Those kinds of joints for our, in our examples, is going to be made by cartilage on top of bone. But for these animals, it's going to be made up by special connective tissue that allows for flexibility and locomotion. And so it wouldn't be any good for these animals to have that stiff covering if they wouldn't be able to move. And that's the purpose of the joints. And so poda just means, literally means foot. But it's not only the feet of these animals that is going to be jointed. When you look at arthropods that have antennae, those are also going to be jointed. When you think about insects, which have wings, the wings are also jointed. So any mobile part of the animal is going to be attached to the rest of the body by means of joints. What do we have here? Here you see the arachnids, like a spider. Here you have a crustacean. I'm going to change back to my laser pointer for mode. So here you see an arthropod, which we call a crustacean, crabs, lobster, shrimp, like the one you see in the picture. That is also going to be an arthropod. When you look at insects, butterflies, beetles, here you see wasps. Here you see a form of bug. True bugs are going to have this long proboscis, which is going to be like a feeding tube for feeding on liquid. So all of these animals are going to have those jointed appendages, exoskeleton. What I want you to remember about these animals is that they're also eucoelomates. They do have a true coelom. They have cephalization with an abundance of sensory organs. And in terms of the subphyla that I want you to remember here, there's going to be the trilobites. These are all extinct animals. We don't have any that are alive now, but we know that they existed at some point in the history of Earth. They were the most dominant, most abundant organisms in the ocean floor by the abundance of these fossils we can find in certain layers. There's also going to be the Chelicerata. The Chelicerata is going to include the arachnids. Chelicera simply means pinchers. And so when you look at arachnids like scorpions, they're going to have those chelipeds or chelicera. The myriapods, myria comes from the same root as the word myriad. You may be familiar with it. A myriad is like an abundance, like a numerous type of a thing. And in this case, myriapoda means many legs. And examples are going to include centipedes, like the one in this picture. Millipedes are also going to be included here. Differences between millipedes and centipedes is that in the millipedes, there are 2 pairs of legs per segment. In the centipede, if you look at each segment of the animal, there's only going to be 1 pair of legs. The hexapods are going to be the insects, and there were several examples of insects on my previous slide. Here's a butterfly, that's an example of an insect. Wasps are example of insects. Bugs, beetles, and a number of others, flies, are also examples of insects. So hexapoda, the name means 6 feet, and that's what they use for locomotion, 6 legs for locomotion. And the other subphylum of arthropods that I want you to remember and pay attention to is going to be the crustaceans. We're going to be dissecting one in lab. We're going to be looking at a crayfish, which in anatomy is similar to shrimps and lobster. And so that's the crustacean we're going to see. What they have in common that makes them part of this clade Ecdysozoa, remember, is that these arthropods, in order to grow, they have to shed that outer covering. The outer covering is tough, it is rigid, and it will restrict the growth of the animal. But to deal with this situation, they secrete a new cover, and then they get rid of the old one by the process of ecdysis we've talked before about. All right, so that's all I have for the ecdysozoans, and I have one more video to make, and that is going to be for the deuterostomes. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.